You're listening to the Wool Academy podcast. This is episode number 30. Hello and welcome. My name is Elisabeth van Delden, and once a week we talk to an industry expert from the wool industry supply chain from farm to fashion and beyond, delivering strategies and insights to be successful in wool and showcasing those beautiful stories wool has to tell. Today on the show we welcome Ingun Klepp. Ingun is a research professor from the Consumer Research Norway, an institute at Oslo and Akershus University College of Applied Sciences. Ingun is an expert in research on sustainable textiles, clothing, laundry, as well as leisure consumption. Ingun has written numerous articles and books on all of these topics, including many on wool. I personally love the work that Ingun does because she always takes a different approach to wool and consumer research, which is why she always reveals these super interesting consumer insights. I hope you enjoy this interview with Ingun Klepp. Let me know what you think in the show notes after the interview. But now let's get started with Ingun Klepp. Welcome, Ingun. We look forward to hearing more about your work today. How are you?
I'm fine, thank you.
It's so great. I know you have so many research projects and you're very busy. So let's start quickly by you telling us a little bit about yourself and the work that you do.
Yes, I do consumer research, and very often with the topic of textile and clothing, and a lot of it also with wool. And I've done research from very many different angles, especially environmental issues, but also equality and things like that, health and yeah. I'm educated in ethnology in Oslo, but have been working with consumer research for quite a while now. So ethnology is still there, but I guess I'm more a consumer research person than ethnologist just now.
Okay, and I noticed from looking at your different research papers that you've done a lot of consumer behavior research in relations to textiles, as you just said as well, but a lot of them on wool. And
Yeah.
is wool your favorite fiber? And if yes, why is that?
Yes, yeah. I think there is more than one reason for me working so much with wool, and the one thing is that as a researcher, I am very interested in the connection between the technical or material and the social or cultural, and I think that wool is very rich when it comes to technical properties because it's a very complex fiber. And on the other hand, it's also a very complex fiber when it comes to the social or cultural part of it. It's a long cultural history. It has a lot of the clothing we are still using is connected to this history. So I think that one of the reasons for choosing or working so much with wool is this connection between this richness, both on the technical and the social side. And then it is another thing, and that is that I am very interested in doing research that has a benefit for someone, and making better clothing for the Norwegian population or for other people, and contribute with research that will be able to to give knowledge that can be utilized to give people better clothing. That is something I am very interested in, and I think for many people, for many groups of people, would contribute to a better clothing. So that is one reason. And then the third thing is that I have been making things my whole life, and I like to make things in wool, and I guess this is not only me, but very many people that do hand knitting or weaving and things like that. They use a lot of wool because it is a pleasant material to work with. So this is the third reason, I guess. And then some of the project is in connection with Norwegian industry, and wool is an industry here, and that would have been different if I had been working in a country with the cotton industry, for instance.
Yeah, so yeah, many reasons, and as you
Yes.
said, that's also quite complex, all those different reasons. And indeed,
Mhm.
you create these amazing woolen clothes, and I think most people knit themselves a sweater, but you also knit dresses and skirts and tops. So indeed, you are very creative also.
Thank you very much.
And yeah, so you talked about the complexity, and I think to better understand what all you mean is by talking about the different research projects that you have. And
Mm.
one of the recent research projects is from 2016, where you published a study called Why Cotton as Linen, the Use of Wool in Beds in Norway. Why did
Mm.
you research on this topic, and what did you find out?
Yeah, actually, this was a project that we had founded by the Australian wool industry. So some of the reason for doing it was actually questions they had, and they were very interested in the difference in wool use between Norway and Sweden. So this was a part of it, but everything was about wool in beds. And this paper is about how um, wool or other fibers has been used in Norwegian beds. And I was very, very curious about when we started to use cotton and how cotton became such an obvious choice for bed linen. And it is quite little research both on night clothing and bed linen. So this was also interesting from that perspective, that it was quite a lot of new things that was possible to say about it. Um, so I tried to find out both when and why this change to cotton happened, and I would also be very interested in finding out more about how people experienced the change from wool to cotton. That was much more difficult to find sources about. Um, yeah, so but and then of course I was also interested in both in bed linen and in the clothing used in beds. And the results are like that beds has been very prestigious thing. People tend to use a lot of effort to have nice beds, and the beds was also in the living room more than today, where the beds are more in a separate room. So it was really somewhere you could, show off, and it was a lot of the textiles that now are hanged on the wall, or more decorative art pieces that was on the beds. And from very early on, it was either woven wool or sheepskin or other skins with the fleece on, like um, and very, very warm. And it was not used clothing on the body; it only the skin. And then the cotton came, and also the night wearing of clothing. But still, it is like a lot of people don't use bed clothing, and the way they are using bed clothing is also very different. And I also wanted to find out, that is not in the same paper, but it's in the same project, uh, what sort of wool are used in beds today. And that is, and the answer on that was very interesting, because the market here is very, very poor. I mean, it's very, very little bed linen available in other things, in other material than cotton, and that goes for night gown as well, or night dresses or pajamas and things like that. But so the market is very poor, but then people tend to use a lot of wool in the bed, and that was interesting, that people do things and use things that is not on the market. So that I found that interesting, also from a way of thinking about the market that's very conservative and not necessarily in line with people's actual praxis.
Can you give an example of what people were using that you were surprised?
Yes, it depended on why you are using clothes at night, and it is two reasons for using clothes at night. And that one has to do with warmth, and the other has to do with decency, and not being naked. And this not being naked, it's something that it's part of the life with small children and especially because then you are more social at night. Um, but with warmth, it is also to do with the life because it's periods of life tend to be colder than others, and also women tend to be colder than men at night. So the clothing or the textile in use was the item that was most often used was actually socks, woolen socks. And then a lot of people also used wool underwear. And they could use it either when they were in cold environment or when they felt cold or sick. So it was used not always, but sometimes. And then in the bed, it was used a lot of different wool textiles, blankets, but these was used differently. Sometimes under, sometimes on top of the duvet, sometimes under the duvet, sometimes in the bed sheet, and so on. So it was no one rule for how to use it. It was quite a variety of practices, and people had invented their own
Systems.
yeah, own systems. And also they in Norway it's cold in winter and warm in summer, and then they had systems for this in different period of the year. For instance, using the wool blanket in a bed sheet as a summer duvet, and then using the wool blanket under or on top of the duvet as a winter bed.
Okay.
So it was quite inventive and quite quite a big variety of practices. Yeah, and this was very different from the market, which is very dominated by cotton, and the only thing you really can choose between is whether it should be flannel or damask, or these kind of more different kind of cotton, or print or not print, things like that, but not the fibers really.
Yeah. And tell me, when was that switch from wool to cotton? In like which century are we talking?
Yes, that is the the best source we do have for beds in Norway is a man called Eilert, and he wrote very good books about Norwegian culture in the 1860s. So his records is very good. So we know a lot about the beds in the 1860s, and then later in the beginning of the 1900, then we will have also quite good sources. And the change from wool to cotton is all about economy and the cheap imported textiles that came, and also then was less time consuming and less money consuming to access. So this is a lot about economy, but also a different way of thinking about hygiene, because the old bed was not washed as often as cotton normally are. So it's both economical reasons, but also another way of thinking about hygiene.
Okay, that's really interesting. And speaking of hygiene, is actually another research topic of yours that I think you presented it once at an IWTO Congress, and it's stuck in my head since then. You did a research study on the smell of textiles, and
Yeah.
the research title was "What's the Problem? Odor Control and the Smell of Sweat in Sportswear." And I think I remember correctly, you had a bunch of people sweating a lot in the gym, And then you had contestants smell their sweaty clothes. Tell us a little bit more about the research project and what you
Yes,
found.
yeah, it was very interesting thing to do because I think smell is a topic that affects us a lot on one side, and on the other side we don't know so much about it. So it's an interesting topic to go into. And actually, here the reason for doing this was not wool in the first place. It was a project about nanotechnology. So we wanted to have a look at these kind of treatments that you can use to prevent odor in sport clothing. Nano silver or silver salt used to prevent sports clothing for smelling. And so we wanted to check out whether they worked or not, really, and if they worked, how efficient they were. And yes, we used a sports gym, and it was like 30 very sweaty people from both sexes, and this was a circular thing, so we had the sweat from all of them on the textiles. So the textiles was actually dripping wet when we started. And then we had a look at how airing and washing affected the smell. Um, and the results was quite surprising. And the most surprising thing was actually not connected to wool. The most surprising thing was that fabric softener had a very, very bad influence on the smell of synthetic textiles. So that was actually the most surprising thing about it. When it comes to wool, it was not surprising that wool smell less than other textiles, but the thing is that airing was more effective than washing when it came to remove the smell. So that was quite surprising. And also that the treatment we had in the test was better than the synthetics without treatment, but not as good as cotton or of course wool. So I think that the argument that synthetic with silver treatment is a good thing because you then can wash more seldom, it doesn't really work. But it work with wool, and I think this is an area where the wool industry could do more work to not only know that wool is not smelling, but also use it better in marketing, and also in building up more knowledge about it, because this can make it easier for people, and it can also reduce the environmental footprint. So it's a very good story, and we are not utilizing it as good as it could be, I think.
Okay, yeah, I think that's a really nice message that you're giving there, and I'm sure our audience is interested in finding out more. And now you're working on a project called Cruise.
Yes, it's called krus in Norwegian, and this is actually crimp in English. It is a property wool has, some of the wool at least, and Norwegian wool has a very good crimp. So that's why we called it krus, because we think to emphasize the raw materials importance for the finished textiles is something we want to work with, and we think that we can learn a lot from the food industry here to talk more about the raw materials and the differences between them, and when they are used in a good way, and what the differences in the raw material, how that can be utilized in different products. So that's why we call it krus.
And yeah, I think Tune Tobiasen talked a little bit about the project in episode 3. And if I understood correctly, Cruise is about enhancing the local value chains for Norwegian wool. And what I found interesting is that this project has received a high amount of research funding. And tell us a little bit why this project fits so well in today's world that you even get a lot of funding for it.
Yeah, I was quite surprised because we were competing with projects connected to the food industry, for instance, or the forest industries. So we were very very proud and happy to have the project. And yes, it's about the Norwegian wool industry, and it is looking at the whole value chain for wool in Norway and trying to solve some of the problems along this value chain from the sheeps to actually clothing. But it has also another goal, and that is about sustainable fashion. And that goal is bigger because it's not only about Norway. It's about sustainability in the textile. Um, uh, Production and use everywhere. And what we try to do there is uh, to discuss sustainability in a different way than it is used to do. Usually, is done today because we think that. The discussion is very much about waste, and it's very much about recycling, and it's very much about everything that is bad and dirty and so on. But we think that instead of doing that, it could be that we should talk more about values and more about what we really want to produce and how we should use these things. And we also think that the discussion about the local production and the way that people are connected to some things and want to keep it and want to care for it and want to have it a long time. All these issues is much more important for the total impact, and that's why we wanted to start to work with changing the discussion of sustainability in the textile sector. And that is a big, a big thing to try to do. So cruise, yes, it's about Norwegian wool and our value chain here in Norway, but it's also about trying to change a discussion about sustainability when using value and items that you can have for a long time and better clothing and better production of clothing as issues, not only waste and pollution. So that's so it's also the project is both local and very global.
And turning the discussion to a positive one and not.
Yes, I think so, and I think that is we need to know where we want to go, not only where we don't want to be. And I think this is a really important thing for the industry and also for the sustainability discussion, that everything is so much linked to the thoughts about waste. And of course, yes, we are producing a lot of waste, but we have to stop to produce all this waste instead of thinking so much of how to use the waste. So I think the discussion is on the wrong field somehow, and to make a big change we have to stop producing the waste, and then we have to think about values, not waste, when we are producing things.
I think
And when we are using them as well, of course. Yes.
Yeah. Okay, we heard now about 3 different research projects from you. And can you maybe, and you already mentioned that there should be more research also going on in the area of smell. Where else do you see the need for more research? Obviously, you can't research on everything, but where would you see that the wool industry could do more work that would be beneficial?
Yeah, first of all, it's already a lot of areas that started. Like, for instance, we are now working on the use phase for the LCI studies, and I think that is very, very important to really look into how wool are used and other clothing also are used, and have that as a argument in to have better LCA and also a better rating of wool in the environmental ratings. So that is one area. And but then personally, I am very interested in people and making the clothing for people better. And I think the group of people that have might be very interesting to look more into is older people, because I think it's a lot of older people that are cold and they have bad clothing and they are sitting a lot still, smelling, and yeah, they could need something to give them a better life. And I think so older people and the whole health care area is interesting to look at. And then of course I'm interested in physical activities and how we could use more knowledge about clothing as a way of making, for instance, the childhood more active, better clothing for outdoor, also for children in schools, and so on. So I mean, all this with activity and quality of life and clothing, I think is an area that I would like to do more research myself, and also like to see others doing research, because I think that clothes are too much discussed in very superficial ways, and also not connected to our goal and that is should be, better health, better life, more equality, and so on. So I think it's a lot of work to be done in these kind of areas. And then I also think that wool has been and still are to some degree a very valuable textile fiber, and we need more values in the textile industry and in the use of textiles. So I think this is also somewhere that we should work more on to 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 strengthen the way of thinking about textiles as something of value. And this is an area I think that the industry could contribute and be aware of the danger of copying the fast fashion and the overuse, overproduction of textile fibers. So I think to keep in mind that to be different and to be connected to the history and connected to a fiber with that are regarded as something of value.
Yeah, no, but thank you, Ingun. I think that was a really great statement to finish. And before we close, how can our listeners find out more about your work so that they can maybe get inspired and do more great work as well?
Yeah, I have published most of the papers, of course, are in English, so that's available. And both the research papers and, of course, the reports are in English. So I guess it's to go to SIFO's website, and then the reports can be downloaded from the website, and the articles and you have to go through the library system to get access to. But if you have problem with finding, so just contact me, and I will help you with it. And then it's some of the things I published that is only in Norwegian, but that is more popular things in magazines and newspapers, things like that. So yeah, most are in English, and then something are also published in other languages.
Yeah, and I've been to the CIFO website, and it's really a great resource for all different kinds of papers that Ingun wrote, and I will make sure to link to the show notes so that it's easy to find. Well, thank you, Ingun, so much for your time today, and I would wish you lots of success in all your different research projects, and that they create the value that you aim for.
Thank you, Elisabeth.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye bye.
I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I did. I find the approach Ingun takes to research on wool very inspiring, and I really look forward to all the work that she will do in the near future. If you want to find out more about Ingun and her work, visit the show notes where you can find all the links that will connect you directly to Ingun. Visit elisabethvandelden.com/030. Once again, elisabethvandelden.com/030. We love that you're listening to this podcast. Make sure you also connect with us on LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram. See you there, and bye for now.